Hi everyone, welcome to Asami Rat Care. So today's video is going to be on the importance of company to rats, and when I say company I mean the company of other rats. The main reason that I'm looking at this, apart from the fact there was a vote on my Facebook page where I was struggling to choose between two quite important topics, is because company is in my mind, and actually in the mind of anybody that's spent a good amount of time around rats, that kind of really gets them. Company is the single biggest thing you can do for a rat. Like wonderful cages, wonderful enrichment, great diet, etc. Nothing is as significant and important to rats as the company of other rats. And it's telling that I have Burko here and Trix here, because both of these had a kind of challenging period in their lives where they didn't have company, or their company was inappropriate, or they kind of had difficulties which meant that company further on became more harder for them to kind of get on with the other rats. So in Burko's case, he came to us from a wonderful breeder living with other rats very happily on his own, and was moved into a group with other boys and just did not get on with them. He really found the move stressful and difficult, and whilst he's an absolutely lovely boy, he didn't know what to do, and he overreacted to simple things, simple stimulus, until we could get him castrated and move him in with the girls. And now he is so much happier, it's unbelievable. And then little Trix here. Trix came from, I would say, an unethical breeder. She was missexed, she was homed with two brothers. By the time she came to me, which was at least a month, probably 6 weeks after she'd been home, she was smaller than my 7-week-old babies. She was still in a kitten coat. She'd been homed probably at about 3 or 4 weeks old, but being homed that early meant that nutritionally she wasn't getting what she needed, so she was physically a lot younger than what she was. So she missed out on social interaction with kind of normal, I would call them normal rats, and also her siblings at a really critical stage in her life, and it made intros with her very difficult. It took me probably about 5 weeks to get her settled. She came in here as a foster originally and then went to another home, but it took me 5 weeks to get her settled with my girls eventually. I started out with some babies, put her in the main group, and oh my god, she freaked out. And then even now she does still struggle a little bit with introductions, but she's improved beyond measure by being in with a kind of healthy, happy group. And that is down to this kind of period of social stress and lack of proper company. So these are two examples of rats that have had a tough time but are obviously happy now in their groups. Hey, sit Chuck. Chocobo's checking it is still Burko visiting me. But yes, so they're kind of there to illustrate some physical examples of why company is so important, but actually there's a lot of scientific research around it as well. Because rats are used as experimental models for humans, they're quite interested in how they react to social situations. So they've looked at social isolation, as they call it in rats. So that is rats that are kept purely on their own, and they've found that they have elevated levels of anxiety. They can get very easily stressed. They get depressed, which is kind of understandable. And these are rats that are taken from their families young, so they would be used to it, but they're still suffering from elevated levels of stress. Their sleep periods, and for the same amount of sleep they get lower quality sleep, so they don't rest as much. So their kind of general immune system's lower. Whilst they may even sleep more, they still don't get as much effective sleep as rats that are in the company of others. So this kind of evidence all builds up. They're also actually more prone to aggressive behaviours when they do finally get introduced to other rats. They generally have a tougher time of it. They can be more aggressive to humans. What they also found, which was quite an interesting one, is human kind of company does not replace it. They did a study where the rats were still handled by kind of lab assistants for a period of time each day, and they found that actually those rats suffered from hyperactivity, which would kind of make sense because that's the only contact they're getting with other kind of animals. So it really affects them, so they're so hyper when they see them. And this fits into kind of actual experiences. Often when I hear about people that have lone rats, either those that choose to get a lone rat on its own, or those that have a lone rat after its cage mate has died, their kind of answer to why it's okay is, but they're so happy. I can see them, they're happy, they're bounding around, they're always at the front of the cage to see me, they love me so much. And that is true. A lone rat, to a lone rat, you are the centre of their world. Rats are kind of pack animals as such. They live naturally in a kind of family group. Everything in their kind of system is hardwired to spend time with others. They're very social animals. You don't have to spend time, much time watching a group to see all the little social signals they do, the way they play together, the way they sleep together, they groom together, etc. Everything about them is set up for this kind of idea of company. And sadly, humans are just not enough. So when your rat is really happy to see you because it's on its own, that's because you're the only company it's got. You become the centre of its world. A healthy, well-balanced rat will actually want to do other things, will be kind of bold and interested and curious in the world, and then interested in you. And that's not to say you're missing out on a relationship, because when you have a rat that can focus on other things than you, that can explore, that can have adventures, and then chooses to come with you, the level of your kind of relationship is much more about the rat's choice. When a rat is on its own and has nobody else, it will form a strong bond with you, but it will need you, it won't choose you, and that's quite different. So my rats are a very good example. You'll see in this kind of video, when I have them free ranging, they will kind of wander up onto me sometimes, and then they'll wander off, and then somebody else will come and visit me, and so on. And that's a very natural kind of relationship that they have with me, where they understand that I have a point in life. They quite like me, and we get on very well. They love to come up and lick me and play with me and check that I'm okay. But actually, somebody's climbing up the cage at the moment, somebody's on the cat tree. I have no idea what half the other people are up to, but probably something they shouldn't. Tato's visiting me at the moment, and the two kind of awkwards are staying on here because they're not quite up to full free range yet. I don't think they realise that there's a full free range on the floor yet. But yes, they're very much choosing the level of interaction that they have with me, and that's quite important for them and for me. So this is the kind of key thing. When our rats are happy to see us when they're on their own, that is not a sign that they are happy, because when you are not there, and let's face it, every one of us, even if you don't work, even if you're there all through the day, there's a period of time, about 8 hours, where we go to sleep, maybe a bit less if you're not sleeping particularly well. But nevertheless, we are asleep for a period of time. Even when we're around at home all the time, the rat will not necessarily be with us. Rats, interestingly, have a very different sleep pattern to us, so they will sleep for around, typically about 4 hours, then they'll have a period of activity, then sleep for 4 hours, and so on. They're most active around about dawn and dusk. It's unlikely that we're going to be most active at both those periods, unless it's like winter and it's quite a short day. And they will need the company more then than they will at any other time. And even if we adjust our lives for them, we are not going to sleep in that kind of blocks. We're not going to be around when they're awake in the same way. And it's basically, it's not the same. It's a good, worth a try, and it's okay for a short period of time where you're trying to sort out company for the rat, but it's really not a kind of proper substitute for other rats. So if you look at other rats, they'll have a similar sleep pattern, they'll be around for a period of time. If you have a larger group, which actually does work better for rats, they will always have a playmate awake at the same time as them, and that works really well. So it's one to think about when you're thinking about the argument that we already give the rats company. The next thing to think about is grooming. So a very important social activity for rats is grooming. We can give them scritches, like I am with Burko at the moment, which they do quite like a lot of the time, or we can stroke them. Both of those are very pleasant for the rats usually. Some rats prefer one over the other, but it is not grooming. So when a rat grooms another rat, they nibble with their teeth, and they nibble really close to the skin in between the fur, and they will scrape the skin, remove dead skin cells. If they have parasites in the wild, they would remove those as well, but it's not really usually a problem in pet rats. And they will also spread oils along the coat from the skin, and this is really important. This helps keep them in lovely glossy condition, because rats, they struggle, let's grab Trix here as an example, they struggle to groom over this kind of area, so around the back, because they can't get their teeth round, and they can do a certain amount with licking and pulling with their paws and so on, but a rat being like relying on other rats will be able to get that area no problem whatsoever, won't they, Trix? And you can actually often see in a lone rat their coat will not be in as good condition as a kind of rat that's living in a social group. As well as grooming, mentioned sleeping and the study on sleeping. So rats derive safety from the other rats that are around them. That's because, like any prey animal, they rely on others to give them kind of signals of danger. So the idea is that if you're in a group, somebody's going to hear the enemy approaching, or somebody's going to see them, and so on. So they feel safer when they're sleeping with others. The odd rat will still choose to sleep alone, and that's absolutely fine, but they'll still be in the vicinity of the other rats and can hear if there's any danger signals. So it allows them to sleep much more deeply. You'll actually notice it in, thank you Trix, you'll notice it in the way they sleep. Generally when they sleep with others, it's very relaxed, flopped out, kind of rat pile, lovely to see. And then when you see them sleeping on their own, they're kind of like curled up in a little defensive ball, generally a lot tenser, and as the scientific studies have shown, not sleeping as deeply, which you'd understand. They don't want to sleep too deeply in case something dangerous happens, and they then kind of have to react and run away and get away from that danger. So it's a very natural thing for them to do, to not sleep deeply when they're on their own. So that's looking at sleeping. The other major thing, and the reason that kind of pet rats left alone are more prone to react badly to other rats they're introduced to, and can actually have more kind of hormonal problems, etc., is because they forget, well, they don't learn to speak rat properly. And by speaking rat, rats have ways that they communicate, they talk, they act. It's kind of like the socially acceptable things. Much like if we're meeting a new person, we might shake their hands. Rats have a way that they act around new rats, including sniffing, reacting, and the rat that's going to be dominant will make a few moves and expect the rat that's going to be submissive to submit properly, etc. And this is all kind of important social structure. And actually, they do have kind of little dialects, so rats that are closely related have a more similar dialect to others. But when you've got a rat that's lived on its own for a long time, it does not know how to communicate properly. It will react as though it's being killed in certain situations, like little Trix here. When one of my adults went to kind of pin and sniff her bits, something that the babies I had at the time that were the same age as her just kind of rolled over and let them. They were a little bit scared, but they dealt with it. Trix screamed and started bouncing around the cage as though she was being murdered. And then my adults were like, oh my god, what the hell is going on with this weird little rat? So then actually acted worse to her because they were like, there's something wrong with her. I must find out what's going on with this rat. Let's try and catch it and pin it down. And it was kind of an escalating situation. So I had to kind of reappraise, give them a break, give her time with my babies learning how to be a normal baby before she got introduced back to the adults again, which actually did work out quite well. But yes, so this is kind of quite a good example of rats not speaking rat. You can also find that they start picking up means of communicating with the only other animal that is around them, which is us humans. So they kind of react in a way a human might expect them to rather than another rat would, which makes intros very difficult. It also makes them kind of behave in a different way, not as ratty, not as kind of what I'd class as normal. And rats are wonderful in their own right. They don't need to learn to speak human to be wonderful. They just need to learn to be themselves, and then you kind of go along with them for the ride. But yes, so this kind of not speaking rat is quite a big thing. It also affects their health. So if a rat is getting lower quality sleep, if it's living in a permanent state of slightly more anxious, slightly depressed, slightly stressed, it will affect its immune system. So they're more prone to kind of succumbing to illnesses. And even if you've got a rat, and I see this quite regularly, kind of vets telling owners to take the poorly rat away from its group, and actually that rat tends to go downhill pretty quickly unless you're very lucky. And that is because this kind of depression, this anxiety, this difficulty sleeping on their own actually kicks in, and it makes them kind of struggle even more. Most vets now realise that prey species in particular, you don't want to separate them. It's not good for the rats involved. Usually they're very caring. I don't know if anybody's seen the studies in terms of empathy with rats. but they are very empathetic to members of their group that are poorly. Generally they will look after them, nurse them, kind of keep them warm. I've had like old rats, and my babies, who you'd think would be just wanting to play all the time, they had a rota going on where a baby always slept with the old rats to make sure it had company, and then when that baby wanted to play, another baby would come down and sleep with it, and so on, and they would actually genuinely look after that old man. Generally when they stop looking after a particular rat, you can tell they're either very ill on the way out, or kind of have decided they don't want company. So they're quite a good kind of read on kind of how the rat is doing. But yes, so it's quite important in the terms of health and kind of well-being that they have this company. So those are kind of the main things. So if you've got a lone rat, what can you do? So the first thing to think about is actually getting company, but you have to try and get the right kind of company. And you also need to accept that if that rat's been alone for any length of time, it's probably not going to be easy. Sometimes it is, sometimes they just breeze in and they're absolutely fine and they're the kind of rat that every rat tolerates. Other times they are not, and you have to work at it, and you have to try different groups, and you have to try neutering, so castration or spay, depending if they're a buck or a doe. And that's because of this, like, not being able to speak rat well. They're not being able to communicate properly, they piss the other rats off with their weird behaviour that they're not expecting. So the best kind of starting point with company is, let's say you've got an adult rat that's been on its own for at least a few months, is to think about going for youngish babies. Now this does depend a little bit on whether the adult rat is quite relaxed and calm. If it's already quite aggressive, just whip its bits off, and that will probably improve the situation. I will do a kind of video on castration and on spaying at some point as well, to talk through the kind of difficulties and the challenges and the things to think about with that. But if you want a rat to get on with other rats, then it can be a very useful tool if they're already a bit aggressive and tense. So then babies are quite a good company because they are non-threatening, particularly for bucks. Does, they can be irritating. A few of my does don't particularly like young babies because they annoy them. But with bucks in particular, the boys don't yet smell funny, i.e. they don't have testosterone come through yet, so you can actually smell the difference yourself as a human when they change from like babies and they smell quite doe-like and sweet, and then the testosterone comes through, the fur gets coarser, and they suddenly smell kind of macho and kind of, I don't know, slightly oaty cereal, like a bit like toasted cereals. It's quite nice, the kind of adult buck smell. And interestingly, when you castrate them, they start smelling like does again. And if our nose can detect it, a rat's nose can clearly do it a hell of a lot better. So you're looking at this kind of young period. You don't want them too young, you want them to have a bit of weight about them. So maybe about 10, 11 weeks old is quite a good age to introduce babies, and then you do need to be careful. So carrier method may be the best method, but there are other methods you can think of as well, just to kind of try and work out what's going on there. It's an unknown situation, but often that does work. Often they get on very well with their kind of new like baby friends, and they can slowly learn to be rats, and actually once you've got them in with the first group, the first pair, you can often get them in with more and more as they kind of get on. If you've got a young rat that's on its own, you need to make sure that you get its similar aged company. So this is really important. Trix kind of demonstrated that. They need to learn from other young rats how to play effectively, and learning how to play, much like with children, it teaches them how to be adults in a kind of healthy, normal way as well. So that kind of play period is really important, kind of socially, and it's also really important that they kind of get to be children, get to be kids, because it's good for them, it's nice for them. In studies it's shown that they prefer company of their own age when they're youngsters. As they get a bit older, let's say 5-6 months old, it becomes less important because they're playing less, and there's a smaller difference between the behaviour of a kind of 6-month-old and a 9-month-old, let's say, than there is between a kind of 6-week-old and even a kind of 3-month-old. There's actually quite a lot of difference in their kind of play. It's a lot rougher when they get older, and the babies don't understand. So it does make quite a difference here. But yes, so think about that, and then try things, but don't think that if it fails with one group it's going to fail with everything, and Burko is a perfect example of that. Burko failed with several different attempts at being introduced to other books, ranging from young books to older books, big group of books, small group of books, and so on. Castrated him, moved him in with Tato, and he was in kind of heaven, and then moved him in with Trix, and he got he was even happier. He was starting to relax. He started to ping again, which for an adult book is quite impressive. And now he lives with a group of 7 girls, including Trix and Tato, and he's very content, very happy. You would not think he was the same stressed rat that he was in that first video I did on socialisation. He's kind of properly coming into his own now, which is lovely to see. And I think it's also important to mention Trix's thing. So she was struggling a little bit in a group over in Lovecraft, and that's where she lived after she came here for foster as a youngster. So I tried her in my group here, and you'll see that on my introduction video. And they got on okay, but it was turbulent, let's say. She lived with Ven and with Luna, and they were kind of constantly sniping at each other. And then as a bit of a chance, I thought I'd try her with Tato. I actually tried Ven and Luna as well. Sadly, they're no longer with us. They were older girls, bless them. But they got on really well, and she's more relaxed and happier. We never thought we'd get her in with a proper big group. And again, she's living in my group of 8, and she is a different rat. She's actually a lot more affectionate with me now than she was when she was in a smaller group and a more stressful group, because she's learning from my girls as well. And you're coming into your own, aren't you, little miss? Even if she's quite a bit older than the rest of the girls in the group, you wouldn't think it. She's a very happy rat now. Despite her awkward start, she does overreact to things a little bit and is a bit squeaky, but they forgive her because she's theirs, ultimately. And that's an example of sometimes you have to try different groups. So she's been now in probably about 3 or 4 girl groups. We considered spaying her, but she's never been bad enough to spay. She's never caused injuries to other rats. She's never been particularly aggressive. She just overreacts and is a bit of a kind of wimp. So we have to kind of think about that. And we thought we'd try with a few more groups before we resorted to that. Particularly now she's not a youngster. She's over 2 now. And actually, by trying the different groups, we found one that really suited her. And it is convenient. We have the ability, between myself and Lovecraft, we have several groups of rats that we can try different people in. But if you're not in that situation yourself, you may seriously have to think about talking to other rat owners and trying them in their group. And it's hard because it could mean you're giving up a rat you absolutely adore. But if it's best for the rat, and remember they're going to spend 24 hours a day with the rats that they live with, but they're only going to spend a few hours a day at most with you. So you do have to actually put the rats first in this kind of situation, as hard as it is, and that can mean rehoming. There is nothing wrong with rehoming if you're doing it in the best interest for the rats. To be fair, if you're struggling yourself, there's nothing wrong with rehoming either. But it's one to kind of think about, and it can lead to rats that are a lot happier, a lot more relaxed, that they can be themselves in kind of many more ways. I'm quite looking forward to the stage when these guys can try the floor and have a massive free range area that they've never been able to have before because they've been too nervous. Where are you going, Berko? You'll scare yourself. But yes, so this is something to think about, and it is important. So kind of in recap, I'm just going to kind of summarise. Rats that are on their own, they even with human company, they're going to be more anxious, they're going to be more stressed, they're going to have difficulties kind of getting proper sleep, they're going to not be able to groom themselves as effectively, or they're not going to be able to have you groom them as effectively. They're going to have a naturally slightly weaker immune system because they're undergoing all that kind of stress, etc. And they're going to have less fun, which is important ultimately. They're not going to be able to play in the same way. You're just, sadly, as much as we are fun, we're not nearly as fun as another rat. So if you're struggling with a lone rat and want to see kind of about getting company, try babies first if they're a rat that's been alone a long time, of the same sex. If that isn't working, try castrating or spaying and seeing that works. Don't be afraid of trying different groups and different introduction methods. Some rats don't get on well with a carrier method if they've been alone for a long period of time. It's too much pressure. Try introducing the different numbers of rats. A single rat or 2 rats can be a lot less daunting than being introduced to a big group. and give them a go, give them a try. It is incredibly rare, and I'm talking about in 33 years of rat ownerships, I've come across perhaps one rat that was happier alone, and that was actually a wild rat that had just could not deal with other rats being around him in his cage, but actually was fine with them being outside of his cage. But he was quite a kind of damaged rat mentally as well. He'd had quite a lot of trauma happen to him. He'd been attacked by a cat, etc. I've seen rats that have taken months and months to get introduced to good company, including castration, trying several groups, different introduction methods, etc. But it's all actually worked out in the end for that rat, and they've had the company they deserve. So bear that one in mind when you're thinking, what should I do? Should I get company, or should I just like leave him? Because he seems happy enough when I'm around him. Yes, he's happy, but only when you're around him. And that is very important. If you're only talking about 5-10% of the day when they're happy, that is really not good enough for a rat. They deserve to be happy all their days. Right, so with that in mind, I would encourage anybody, if you've got problems, issues, things you want to chat about around lone rats, maybe you've got an example at the moment and you try and find the best kind of solution possible for it, post questions on here, or on my Facebook group. Probably gets more kind of people replying and such with different points of view, and there are lots of kind of interesting discussion points on this. But have a think, try things, and let me know if I can help. I will do. So over and out from me and Berko and Trix, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye for now.